I am not here to comfort you. Comfort is what people offer when they want to keep the peace between illusions. It's the language of people who would rather soften reality than face the raw edges of it. What I'm about to say doesn't belong to comfort. It belongs to awareness. There are two kinds of people in this world: those who live their lives on the surface, and those who watch the surface from somewhere deeper. Most people never realize the second kind exists. But if you're here, if you're listening carefully enough to feel the weight behind these words, then you already know what I'm talking about. You've felt it before, that quiet distance between you and everyone else. Not because you dislike them, not because you believe you're better than them, but because you see things they don't even notice. You notice the pause before someone lies. You notice the tension in their voice when they pretend to be confident. You notice the way people construct entire personalities just to avoid confronting who they actually are. And once you start seeing those things, you can't unsee them. The world becomes different. Conversations become performances. Smiles become strategies. Kindness becomes negotiation. And silence, real silence, becomes the only place where truth survives. Most people never reach that place. They move through life like sleepwalkers, repeating the same emotional patterns, chasing approval, building identities that depend entirely on how others perceive them. But people like you, people like us, we stepped outside that pattern long ago. Not intentionally, not because we wanted to, but because something in life forced our eyes open before we were ready. Maybe it was betrayal. Maybe it was loss. Maybe it was the slow realization that the world rewards masks more than honesty. Whatever it was, it changed something fundamental. Once that shift happens, you stop participating in reality the same way. You start observing it. You begin to understand people in ways that make connection both easier and harder at the same time. Easier, because you can read them. Harder, because they rarely read you back. Most people are terrified of depth. Not because depth is dangerous, but because depth exposes contradictions. Depth forces people to see the parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding, and avoidance is the most common survival strategy humanity has ever created. Think about it. How many conversations have you had where both people were speaking, but neither one was actually saying what they meant? How many relationships exist purely because both individuals are too afraid to acknowledge the truth? How many lives are built on foundations so fragile that a single moment of honesty would collapse everything? The answer is simple. Almost all of them. That realization changes you. It forces you into a strange position within the human world. You are surrounded by people, yet rarely feel truly among them. Not because you reject them, but because you see through the systems they depend on to feel safe. You see the emotional shortcuts, the intellectual laziness, the unconscious habits people repeat without questioning. And once your mind reaches that level of awareness, there is no returning to the surface. You become something else, not detached, not broken. Just aware in ways most people never learn to tolerate. Awareness is not peaceful. People like to pretend it is. They talk about enlightenment like it's some glowing state of calm understanding, but real awareness isn't gentle. Real awareness is sharp. It cuts through illusions with the precision of a blade. It reveals motives behind kindness, fear behind aggression, loneliness behind arrogance, and insecurity behind almost every display of power you will ever witness. Once you start seeing those patterns, human behavior stops feeling random. You begin to recognize the hidden architecture behind everything people do. Why they chase status, why they crave validation, why they perform confidence even when they feel hollow inside. And the more you understand those patterns, the more isolated you become from them, because when you see the mechanism clearly, it stops controlling you. And systems lose their power the moment someone learns how they actually work. That's why deep thinkers often appear distant. It's not arrogance, it's not superiority, it's simply the quiet consequence of seeing through things others still depend on. Imagine watching a stage play where every actor believes the story is real. They cry, fight love, and suffer within the script they were given. But you, sitting in the audience, can see the strings. You know the walls are painted wood. You know the drama is rehearsed. You know the emotions are part of the performance. How would you feel? Would you jump onto the stage and shout the truth? Of course not. That would destroy the experience for everyone else. Instead, you sit quietly, you watch. You observe the story unfold while knowing something the actors cannot afford to realize. That is what deep awareness feels like in the real world. You walk among people who believe their identities are solid. You listen to conversations that revolve around approval, competition, and social positioning, and all the while, you see the invisible threads connecting everything. Fear, desire, loneliness, the desperate human need to matter. Those forces drive almost every decision people make, yet very few ever acknowledge them. Why? Because facing those truths requires a level of psychological honesty that most people are not prepared to handle. And honesty, real honesty, is dangerous. It strips away excuses. It dissolves comfortable narratives. It forces individuals to confront parts of themselves they would rather keep buried. That's why the majority of society operates on subtle agreements not to look too closely. People instinctively maintain each other's illusions. They reinforce identities, they validate roles. They protect the social fabric by avoiding the deeper questions. But occasionally, someone breaks that agreement. Someone begins asking the questions nobody wants to answer. Someone starts observing instead of participating. Someone refuses to pretend, and when that happens, they become different. Not alien, not superior. Just separate in a way that's difficult to explain to those who still rely on the illusion. That separation is not always lonely. In fact, it can be strangely empowering. Because once you stop depending on external validation, your mind becomes free to explore deeper territory. Territory most people never reach. Questions most people never ask. Truths most people sense but never fully confront. The human mind is far more complex than society allows it to be. But complexity requires patience. It requires introspection. It requires the willingness to sit with uncomfortable ideas long enough to understand them. Most people prefer simplicity. Clear labels, predictable narratives, heroes and villains, right and wrong, but the deeper you look, the more those categories dissolve. Human beings are contradictions. The kindest people can carry hidden cruelty. The strongest individuals can harbor silent fragility. The most confident personalities can secretly fear their own reflection. Reality is layered. And those layers only reveal themselves to minds willing to go deeper than comfort allows. If you've ever felt like you exist slightly outside the emotional rhythm of the world, this is why. You are not broken. You simply stepped beyond the surface. And once someone crosses that line, they rarely return to who they were before, because awareness changes the structure of the mind. It rewires perception. It transforms how you interpret everything, from conversations to relationships to your own internal thoughts. And eventually, you begin to notice something even more unsettling. You are not the only one who sees this way. There are others, rare, quiet, scattered across the world like hidden signals. People who carry the same silent awareness. People who move through life with the same observational calm. People who understand depth not as a concept, but as a natural state of existence. When two minds like that encounter each other, something unusual happens. The conversation shifts. Silence becomes meaningful instead of awkward. Words become precise instead of performative, and both individuals recognize something familiar in the other's perception. A recognition that doesn't need explanation, because depth recognizes depth. Even in darkness, there's something people misunderstand about minds that observe more than they speak. They think silence means emptiness. It doesn't. Silence is where the most complicated thoughts live. While the world moves loudly, arguing, explaining, defending itself, there are minds that sit quietly in the background, studying the entire structure of what's happening, not reacting, not interrupting, just watching. Those minds aren't passive, they're calculating. They're mapping emotional patterns the way a strategist studies a battlefield. Because once you begin to see the hidden architecture behind human behavior, you realize something unsettling. Most people are not nearly as unpredictable as they believe. Patterns exist everywhere. The same arguments repeating between different couples. The same insecurities shaping different personalities. The same fears hiding behind different ambitions. It's like watching thousands of people perform variations of the same emotional script. Different actors. Different costumes. But the same underlying story. The story of wanting to be seen. The story of wanting to matter. The story of wanting someone, anyone, to confirm that their existence has meaning. And once you recognize that pattern, the world becomes strangely transparent. You start seeing the invisible motives behind people's choices. The promotion someone is chasing isn't about money, it's about validation. The confidence someone displays isn't about strength, it's about hiding weakness. The kindness someone performs isn't always about generosity, sometimes it's about earning approval. None of this makes people evil, it makes them human. But understanding those motivations changes the way you interact with the world. Because when you can see the emotional engine driving someone's behavior, you stop reacting to the surface. You start responding to the deeper cause. Someone insults you. Most people react with anger. But someone who understands patterns pauses for a moment. They ask themselves a different question. What insecurity needed to speak through that insult? Someone boasts about their achievements. Most people feel intimidated or impressed. But an observant mind sees something else. They see the quiet fear behind the bragging, the fear of being ordinary, the fear of disappearing into anonymity. Once you begin seeing people this way, conflict starts to lose its power over you. Because you realize most confrontations are not actually about you, they're about something unresolved inside the other person. And once you understand that, you stop taking the world personally. That shift alone separates observers from participants. Participants react emotionally to everything that happens around them. Observers study it. They notice the rhythm of interactions. They notice how quickly people become defensive when their identity feels threatened. They notice how easily entire groups form around shared illusions. But here's the strange part. Even though observers understand people better than most, they often feel more disconnected from them. Not because they dislike humanity, but because awareness creates distance. Imagine hearing every instrument in an orchestra separately. Most people hear the music as one blended sound, but suddenly you hear every violin, every drum, every note slightly out of place. The music becomes more detailed, but harder to enjoy casually. That's what deep awareness does to relationships. You hear the emotional notes others miss. You see the micro expressions people try to hide. You sense tension before words reveal it. And sometimes that level of perception becomes exhausting because awareness doesn't switch off. You can't simply decide to stop noticing things. Your mind keeps analyzing even when you want peace, even when you want simplicity, even when you wish, just for a moment, that you could experience life without seeing all the hidden layers. But the mind doesn't forget what it has learned. Once perception sharpens, it stays sharp. And over time, something else begins to happen. You stop searching for crowds. You start searching for rare individuals. Not people who entertain you. Not people who impress you. People who understand depth. Because most conversations feel shallow once your mind grows accustomed to deeper territory. Small talk becomes noise. Social rituals feel repetitive. Surface-level interactions feel like watching the same scene play out again and again. So the mind starts asking a quiet question. Are there others like me? Others who see the world this way? Others who think beyond the surface without needing to explain why? The answer is yes. But they're not easy to find. People with deep awareness tend to live quietly. They don't advertise their perception. They don't seek attention. They observe. They listen. They remain still long enough to recognize someone operating on the same frequency. When two minds like that meet, the difference becomes immediately noticeable. The conversation moves differently. There's less performance, less emotional exaggeration, less need to prove anything. Both individuals understand something important. Depth doesn't need to be displayed. It only needs to be recognized. And recognition happens quickly between minds that operate the same way. You see it in the pauses between sentences. You see it in the way someone responds to complexity without simplifying it. You see it in the way silence becomes comfortable instead of awkward. That's when something rare begins to form. Not a typical friendship, not a typical relationship, something more subtle. Two observers sharing the same landscape. Two minds that understand the hidden mechanics of the world without needing constant explanation. But even that connection carries a strange tension. Because observers know something others often ignore, understanding someone deeply also gives you the power to hurt them deeply. When you truly see a person, their fears, their motivations, their vulnerabilities, you gain access to the most delicate parts of their psychology. And that level of access demands restraint. It demands responsibility. Most people never face that challenge because they never see each other clearly enough to cause real psychological damage. But observers do. They know exactly where someone's emotional pressure points exist. They know which words could dismantle confidence, which truths could collapse illusions, which silences could make someone question themselves. And because they know this, they become careful. Careful with honesty, careful with criticism, careful with the weight of their own perception. Not everyone handles that responsibility well. Some people use insight as a weapon. They manipulate, they exploit, they learn how to move others like pieces on a board. But the rare minds, the ones who truly understand depth, recognize the danger in that, because manipulation eventually corrupts the manipulator. Once you start treating people like predictable systems instead of conscious beings, you lose something essential about your own humanity. Real observers understand that. They see patterns. But they also respect the mystery inside every person. Even the most predictable behavior contains hidden stories, hidden wounds, hidden experiences that shaped someone's choices long before you met them. Awareness without empathy becomes cruelty, but awareness with empathy becomes something else entirely. It becomes wisdom, the ability to see deeply without losing compassion, the ability to understand people's flaws without condemning them, the ability to recognize humanity's contradictions and still remain part of it. That balance is difficult. It requires constant self-awareness, because the more clearly you see others, the more clearly you begin to see yourself, your own motives, your own insecurities, your own hidden contradictions. The same patterns you notice in others begin appearing in your own behavior. And that realization is humbling. It reminds you that awareness is not superiority. It's responsibility. Responsibility to question your own thinking, responsibility to remain honest about your own limitations, responsibility to avoid becoming the very kind of illusion you learn to see through. That's the true challenge of a mind that watches from the dark, not simply observing the world, but observing itself, because the deepest layer of awareness is not about understanding other people. It's about understanding the observer, the one doing the watching, the one analyzing every interaction, the one standing quietly in the background of reality, you. And once your attention turns inward, the questions become even more complicated. Why do you notice what others ignore? Why does depth feel natural to you while it overwhelms others? What experiences shape the mind that you carry now? Those questions lead into territory few people willingly explore, because self-awareness can be just as unsettling as awareness of others. But that journey, that descent into understanding your own mind, is where the real transformation begins. Not the transformation society talks about, not success, not recognition, something deeper. The moment you stop observing the world from the outside and start understanding the architecture of your own consciousness. That's when the mind watching from the dark begins to realize something profound. The deepest mystery it has ever studied has always been itself. There's a strange moment that happens when a mind begins to understand itself too clearly. At first, awareness feels like power. You see patterns others miss. You rate emotions before they're spoken. You understand motives long before they're admitted. It feels like standing one step ahead of the world. But eventually, something shifts. You begin to realize that the same patterns you see in others also exist inside you. The same fears, the same contradictions, the same quiet battles between who you are and who you pretend to be. That realization humbles the mind in a way nothing else can, because it exposes a truth most people avoid. Self-awareness is not comfortable, it's confronting. The deeper you examine your own thoughts, the more you notice how much of your behavior is shaped by forces you didn't consciously choose, old memories, hidden insecurities, experiences that left marks long before you understood their meaning. Those things shape your decisions more than logic ever will. People like to believe they are rational creatures. But the mind rarely operates on pure logic. Emotion drives thought. Experience drives emotion, and awareness simply shines a light on the entire mechanism. Once that light turns inward, the observer becomes the observed. Your thoughts begin questioning themselves. Why did that comment bother me? Why did that silence make me uneasy? Why did that person's approval feel so important in that moment? Each question peels back another layer of the mind, and each layer reveals something unexpected. Sometimes it reveals strength you didn't know you had. Sometimes it reveals wounds you thought had healed long ago. But the most unsettling discovery is realizing how much of your identity was built as a response to the world. Your personality, your boundaries, your quiet habits of observation, they didn't appear randomly. They formed over time, shaped by every experience that taught you something about human nature. Maybe you learned early that people reveal more when you stay quiet. Maybe you learned that listening gives you more control than speaking. Maybe you learned that showing too much emotion makes others uncomfortable. Those lessons slowly turned into patterns, and those patterns slowly turned into the person you are now, the watcher, the observer, the one who stands slightly outside the emotional chaos of the world. But awareness doesn't stop at understanding the past. It starts asking something more dangerous. Who would you be if none of those experiences had shaped you? Strip away the defense mechanisms, strip away the emotional armor, strip away the careful distance you maintain between yourself and others. What remains? That question sits quietly in the mind for a long time, because the answer is rarely simple. Most people never ask themselves that question. They accept the identity they've built without examining the structure behind it, but observers can't ignore it. Once the mind starts analyzing its own foundations, curiosity becomes impossible to silence. And that curiosity leads to another realization. The world doesn't just shape individuals. Individuals shape the world in subtle ways. Every interaction you have leaves a psychological trace. A conversation that shifts someone's thinking. A moment of honesty that forces someone to reconsider their assumptions. A quiet observation that changes how someone sees themselves. Influence rarely looks dramatic. It rarely announces itself. Most of the time, it happens silently, one idea at a time, one perspective at a time, one conversation at a time. Observers understand this better than most people, because they know how powerful perception can be. The way someone interprets reality determines how they behave inside it. Change someone's perception, and you change their entire experience of the world. That kind of influence carries enormous potential, but it also carries enormous responsibility, because perception can be guided toward truth or manipulated toward illusion. History is filled with individuals who understood human psychology deeply. Some used that understanding to enlighten others. Some used it to control them. Both paths begin with the same knowledge, understanding how the human mind works. The difference lies in intention. The observers eventually face a choice. Will they use their insight to elevate others or to exploit them? It's not always an obvious decision. Sometimes manipulation feels easier. Sometimes controlling a situation feels safer than trusting people to understand you. But every time you manipulate someone's perception, something inside your own mind changes. You begin seeing people less as individuals and more as systems to manage. That mindset slowly erodes empathy. And without empathy, awareness becomes dangerous. True intelligence isn't just about seeing patterns. It's about understanding the human weight behind those patterns, the emotions, the histories, the invisible struggles every person carries, even the ones who appear confident, even the ones who appear careless, even the ones who seem impossible to understand. Everyone is shaped by something. Everyone is carrying something. Observers see those invisible burdens more clearly than most, which is why the wisest observers choose restraint. They choose understanding over control. They choose influence through honesty rather than manipulation, because they know something important. People eventually sense authenticity. You can fool someone for a moment, maybe even for years, but eventually human intuition begins to notice the cracks. Authenticity, however, leaves a different impression. When someone speaks honestly, without hidden agendas, it resonates differently. It feels stable, grounded, real. That kind of presence has a quiet power. It doesn't dominate rooms. It doesn't demand attention. But when it speaks, people listen. Because truth carries a weight that performance cannot replicate. Observers who learn to balance awareness with authenticity become something rare. They become individuals who understand the human mind without losing their humanity. Individuals who can see the darkness in people without becoming consumed by it. Individuals who can stand in complexity without simplifying the world into easy judgments. And that kind of mind becomes something extraordinary, not because it seeks power, but because it understands responsibility, the responsibility of perception, the responsibility of influence, the responsibility of being aware in a world where many prefer not to see too deeply. That awareness can feel isolating sometimes, but it also reveals something quietly beautiful. Even in a chaotic world, even among billions of people, there are minds capable of extraordinary depth, minds capable of reflection, minds capable of growth, minds capable of understanding each other without needing constant explanation. When those minds find each other, something remarkable happens. They don't compete. They don't dominate. They expand each other's thinking. Ideas grow sharper. Perspectives grow wider. Silence becomes meaningful rather than empty. And in those moments, the observer realizes something profound. The purpose of awareness was never to stand alone above the world. It was to understand it deeply enough to connect with the rare minds capable of meeting you at the same depth. Not many people reach that level, but those who do recognize each other quickly, because depth has a signature, a quiet intelligence, a calm presence, a willingness to explore ideas others avoid. When two minds like that meet, the darkness they once navigated alone becomes something else, a shared landscape, a place where thought moves freely, where honesty doesn't feel dangerous, where complexity isn't something to hide. That's when the observer realizes something unexpected. The mind that watches from the dark was never meant to remain alone. It was meant to find others who learn to see the world the same way. And when that happens, awareness stops feeling like isolation. It starts feeling like recognition,